All right. Hello, everyone out in TV land and radio land. It's good to see you, hear you, be speaking with you today. I'm joined by Dr. Patti Fletcher, and we're just going to chat a little bit because we're catching up while people join. We're having a great conversation about Texas and Austin. And so, Austin,
Yeah.
they had when I lived there were tons of regulations that were out of step with the amount of growth that the city was experiencing. So they had, rules about how high you could build buildings next to the river. And, and so I've always feel like Austin has been a little bit behind in terms of infrastructure when compared to the, pace at which it's growing. So it's just like, it takes 2 hours to get across town if you hit it, at the wrong time.
Yeah. I get that enough in Boston, right? I mean, no, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. How long have you been in Boston now?
So I grew up here. I grew up on the South Shore, which is why the recent news that's made the national news about the Cohasset thing. So, I was grew up a few towns from that. So I grew up on the South Shore and then moved away for about 10 years, Silicon Valley, Europe. And then we moved back. My husband's from England, and we moved back here. Of course, I love Boston, and for all its warts, we know the role that it plays in America, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the truth is, because my husband's from England, because I was from Boston, and we lived in other places, we spent any vacation time we had visiting families and not other places.
Yeah.
That's why we moved back.
So that you could go on vacation.
Exactly, so I could go on vacation. That's who you get with me, Brett. So we've been back here since 2000. We live in Metro West. And so for folks who are just joining or not familiar with Boston, Boston is a coastal city, right? It's a coastal city, Bay State. And so I grew up on the South Shore. There's one way into the city from the South Shore, and talk about antiquated, the highway is maybe for one Model T. So it's really you're stuck if you're not taking the train, which is new according to me, because it came in the 90s, I think. And then it's so bad. And then the North Shore is the same thing. Living in Metro West, which is, 25 miles out, but I live about 12. There are multiple ways I can get into the city. It's so funny. And that's kind of, I think, one of the other things, and you're talking about traffic, when you live in the Northeast, and you might remember this, Brett, is nobody talks about miles. So I just said 12 miles. I could never answer that to a local. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Because it's 15 minutes during, no traffic, 3 a.m. But usually it's 3 hours. So I like living out here. It's really interesting. And it's one of those areas of Massachusetts. It's one of those states where people kind of stay where they grew up. I didn't. And it's a place where lots of folks from a lot of different places have come from. So I quite like that. Not
I love it.
But I love that. Yeah.
I miss it so much. And I lived in the South End, and I became very adept at giving tours of the Freedom Trail to my family walking backwards. I could probably
did you even make it as far as doing the ferry back, at Old Ironside?
Oh yeah. So so it doesn't turn at Bunker Hill? Is that the?
It does.
Yeah, so we go all the way out to Bunker Hill, go all the way to the top.
That's right. And let's just give folks a little bit of a realization. So one of the things, so the Freedom Trail in Boston, it's literally marked by a red path or something of bricks throughout the city. And you stop at all the places. And one of them is for the Boston Massacre. And what you find out is, 3 people died?
Yeah.
It was, talk about marketing, right? That was really good marketing back then.
Yeah, that was good political marketing, the Boston Massacre. Well, you've given me something to be grateful for besides you being here today, Dr. Patti Fletcher. I am grateful for the time I spent in Boston. I was in Boston from 2002 till about 2007. The Starr conspiracy was actually founded in Boston. And I did a lot of the agency building from Boston, and our probably first 20 clients were from Boston. And Boston's a notoriously difficult market to break into if you're an outsider. And so it was always strange that when I moved the agency to Texas, that we had all these Boston clients, because everyone's like, how'd you get clients in Boston? They don't even let us in. But I am grateful for my time there. And my drink of choice today is actually, I'm going to say cheers to you with a smart water, because it's part of my New Year's resolution to be more hydrated.
So there's nothing else in there with your smart water, and no unsmart alcohol in there?
Might be vodka.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. I'm drinking, so I'm trying to hydrate more as well. And I typically love water, but too much of it. So mine has a little squirt of that like flavory stuff in
Oh
it.
yeah.
And I'm doing fruit punch today. I feel like the old Kool-Aid person today. So that's what I'm doing tonight. I will be having dinner with the person who actually hired me into SAP way back in 1997. And I'm going to do one break from dry January for me and have a glass of Prosecco. So I'll be grateful for you later and toasting you with an alcoholic beverage.
Where are you having dinner?
We are having it. So, the food scene's an interesting one. And by the way, congratulations in breaking into this market. Because here's the motto of people from Massachusetts. Am I allowed to say what we're called and what we call ourselves?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We are massholes.
Massholes.
And we are very proud of being massholes. We take
Yeah.
that as a like, oh, thanks so much.
Yeah.
But we all, because so many of us stayed here and we have a very kind of big Irish Catholic kind of population here. And I'm also Armenian, which is a very deep kind of rooted here in Watertown, Massachusetts. We pretty much spend all of our waking hours with our family. And so when you are, or people we grew up with, and sometimes it's kind of both, right? My parents grew up 2 houses away from each other and started dating at 12. It's gross. So as their child. And so we're pretty much, whether it's business or it's personal, it's like, no, thank you, I'm all set, right? Like that's pretty much what it is, right? So absolutely, absolutely crazy. But one of the things we're not known for or haven't been known for, and when people move here from Manhattan, they make fun of us for our theater in quote marks from them, and the food scene. It's pretty bad, right? The food scene was pretty bad for a long time. And to your point, places like the South End, which have gone through a big gentrification, effort, pluses and minuses to that. And yes, the pandemic closed down about 1,200 restaurants, I think. So some of those are no longer in. But places like where I live in, which is again 12 actual miles from the city, you'd think we'd have a good food scene. We really don't. There's a lot of chains here. I live in Natick, which is home to the oldest mall in America. We're very proud of that. Just ask us. Oh wait, you don't have to, we'll tell you. But we are starting to get in more kind of farm to table city, kind of things out here. So we're going to a place called Buttercup. It's female owned, and it's all farm to table, and it's just fantastic. It's good here in Natick, Mass.
Well, that sounds good. Wish I was there. Wish I was going out to dinner on a crisp January night in Boston.
It's crisp.
Yeah. Instead, in Fort Worth, it is literally 85 degrees right now. And not quite if you think the food scene in Boston is developing, then if you don't like barbecue or Mexican food, you've got a few choices, or steak. There's always steak. Anyway,
there's meat. Yes.
Let's talk about stuff.
Yeah.
I want to introduce you, and I probably can't do a great job, but you are Dr. Patti Fletcher. You are currently the Chief Marketing Officer at Limeade. We have a lot of just wonderful conversations about Limeade. I'm a huge fan of Limeade, but that's just one small part of your story. You're also a board member. You're an angel investor. You're a workplace equity influencer and a best-selling author. This book, Disruptors, is so good. And look, this isn't like, you can see it's like, this has seen some better days. So I've had this for a long time, and I've never told you. I've had this for a long time, and I love it. This is a great book. And you know what? I picked it back up off my bookshelf about a year ago when we started our own DEI journey with the diversity movement, which is a group that, we're clients of theirs, they're clients of ours, and we've been on our own DEI journey. And anyway, we'll get to that, but I just love this book, and everybody should go to Amazon and buy this book because it's so fantastic. Disruptors, Success Strategies from Women Who Break the Mold. And I read that backwards. So that's
nice work.
Yeah. And, I'll talk a little bit more about the book, but what I love about it is the format, because you've got a chapter with, some pretty, specific, hard-hitting issues. And then you've got a profile of a disruptor, and it just has this real nice flow through it. And, I always go back to my favorite passage in here, which is, I thought I had it marked, but it's like, only read this if you're a dad. Or if you're a dad with daughters. And
yes.
And I read that every now and then. I'm like, God, that is so true. But anyway, I can't say enough great stuff about that book. You're a keynote speaker. You really do it all. And we were kind of laughing beforehand because you were making fun of me about being a little, floral with my language. And I said, you are a true legend of work tech. And, but I'm totally serious, and I'm so honored, for you to be here. And I want to ask you all kinds of questions, but what did I miss? What does the world need to know about Dr. Patti Fletcher?
Yeah, and I think so. First of all, thank you. I'm humbled. Brett and I have known each other for quite a while, and just growing up in this space. So right back at you. And I know that the folks who listen to your podcast know, but you are a legend, and you are somebody who not only I personally, but my boss and our board do turn to you for a lot of strategic insight. So I'm honored to be here. You're a friend. You're someone I look up to. You're a great coach, and you have an amazing sense of humor and a very, very quick wit. So thank you. I think, for me, because I'm a marketer and I know you're the same, marketing is all about tapping into people's motivations, right? And helping them be able to get from where they are to where they want to be. It's transformation, and you're simply a tool to be able to do that. And that's okay. And so I never really ask people what they do. I mean, I get to it eventually, but I want to know like the why. And so for me, one of the things about me to know is I'm very much somebody who likes to align my profession with my passion and purpose. And my passion and purpose is all about leveling the playing field so all talent can thrive, and specifically about changing the way the world views women who disrupt and how they view themselves. And that book is just the examples of these amazing women who were like me, right? Didn't go to a tier 1 school, from the least connected family, right, in the entire world, and seeing what they understood, which is power is not in the position, it's in the platform. It is about tapping into those everyday things that you face at work, that you face at home, everything in between, and looking at status quos that are inefficient, ineffective, and inequitable. They cost too much money, too much time. They don't achieve what they're supposed to achieve, and they don't positively impact the broadest scope of people. And that's kind of how I view marketing as well, right? Being able to tap into that. And so for me, it's really important. And it's really been the story of my career. It sounds like I do a lot of stuff. You do a lot of stuff in tech. That's pretty normal. People kind of have their, talents in. A lot of us are that purpose driven. But everything I do is aligned. I only invest in female founded businesses as an angel investor. I'm now particularly focused at intersection. There's not a lot of money for women. 2% of venture goes to capital goes to women, and that's it, female founded businesses. And it's 0.06% for women of color. So, really being able to leverage that power that I've been able to gain through, quite frankly, being able to work at an executive level, and all that goes with it, and being able to take the stuff, the people I know, the platform that I'm continuously going to build, any kind of revenue that I can get for myself, and be able to fulfill that passion. And the great news is there, and what we see in that book is there are more of us than there aren't of us. So that's really the only other thing I'd add is my why.
Well, I mean, there's just 2 points in the book that are made over and over again. One is in, Starts with a Forward by Lisa Ling, who, I mean, I used to watch on, like television, back in the day, and continue to. I love Lisa Ling. And she basically makes the point when conveying an anecdote about how her show was only picked up for a season when, some of her colleague shows who were white men were picked up for 2 or 3 seasons, even though her ratings were better or at least comparable. And she asked herself, even though she didn't have kids at the time, what would I tell my daughter to do? And she said, I'm gonna do this not just for me, but for everyone else. I mean, it's basically like living, the progress through your daily actions. And that's just, something that's repeated over and over again. But another point that you make deeper in the book is a great anecdote about pay equity, where, you point out that pay equity is about 95% for women compared to men in tech. And there's a conversation between 2 people, and the man says, well, look, it's only 5%. We've kind of fixed that problem. And the woman responds, well, great, I'll take your 5%. It's well made.
That's right.
So I just, I'm not on a promotional tour for your book, but I really do love your book. And
if we do have one, I'm hiring you. I think that's me.
but it's really clear, and I want people to get just a true sense of your background in work tech. I can see, you're living your purpose, not just in the work that you do and everything else that you do, but also, Limeade's a really good match for a lot of reasons there, because that's a purpose-driven organization. But you go back all the way to, SAP, and then from SAP to IBM, and I think back to like SAP SuccessFactors. And then I think WorkHuman was kind of shortly thereafter, and then Limeade. And so, you've been in this space for a while, and you've been with truly some of the most disruptive, kind of organizations at times. People are tired of hearing me talk about it, but at times when, the conversation was, hey, you need to get off your on-premise solutions and get into the cloud. The disruption around SAP SuccessFactors, or the change that you see in recognition from being primarily a 100-year-old industry and service awards driven, et cetera, to what we're seeing in kind of the movement from corporate wellness to well-being and how that touches on employee experience. So you've always kind of been at this intersection. How did you get in to work tech, and how did you just end up in all of the right places at the right times?
It's so funny you say that, and then I'll share with you why I don't think I was in any place at the right time. Shitty timing on my part. So I love that. It's always interesting. So I'm 53 years old. My career has spanned really as a grown up in tech since 1997. And I had no business earlier in my career. I'd say probably up until about 5 years ago. I never took a job I was qualified for. And also one of the other, things in tech is you have such a good, in big tech, I should say, you have such an opportunity to write your own job description, right? It wasn't until kind of later on in the career, taking those kind of officer positions where it's written for you, you get to kind of fill in the blanks on a lot of things. And so I got into this space literally from a friend who introduced me to someone who worked at SAP. I did grad school over in England. And so at the time, if you knew who SAP was in North America, as an example, you worked in finance and you probably didn't like SAP very much. And so when I came over, because I was in England, and that's how I knew them, studying IT, and understanding this whole thing about ERP that was founded in 1972, and how disruptive it was. Predating that, my first experience with a computer was in kindergarten, standing on a milk crate I grew up in Pembroke, Massachusetts, standing on a milk crate in Bryanville Elementary School in the library and looking at this green screen thing and thinking it was the coolest thing with the Dewey Decimal System. I just thought that was fabulous. I know this didn't happen, but in my memory, there's the librarian with one of those big canes, taking me off the thing because I loved it so much. Yeah. But I just thought that was interesting. And then I lived in the Silicon Valley in the early 90s when you'd go visit, friends from work. And I worked at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, right? So that was really cool. That was eye-opening. Also confirmed didn't want to be a lawyer. But you'd go visit your friends who you worked with, and their siblings had just dropped out of Stanford. They're throwing their body over their parents' Formica table in their little kitchen because they're worried you're going to take their big idea for the next big search engine. Meanwhile, I couldn't read anything they were saying because I wouldn't have understood it. But I started really understanding and working at Wilson Sonsini about that impact, right? I went from this little computer that could help me understand, a Dewey Decimal System, to word processing and all that fun stuff, to now it's holy smokes. When you work at the intersection of people, business, and technology, true transformation happens. The way we interact with each other, the way that we work, the way business is done. And so when I came from grad school, and I always loved the business of people, because people are so dynamic. And when I was in grad school, and I think they still probably do this, you saw technology, right? It was the Davenports, it was the Moores, it was, all those folks, the Porters of the world, who really understood the impact of technology and what that looked like, right? The Clay Christensens. And I got that. And I also understood the importance of real estate, right? The real hard things. But I would always think and this was before human capital management was a concept we talked about, but isn't it really your people? And not just your people, but how your people collaborate. What happens? We were really moving from this Taylor-esque mindset of transactional to more transformation. So I always thought that was interesting. So SAP presented this amazing opportunity for me to work at that intersection of people, business, and tech. And so I joined as a pre-sales person in their HR line of business. And again, we weren't known in that market. PeopleSoft was just, they own the North American market. And it was just interesting. And SAP at the time did not invest in marketing. Our big thing was we spend all of our money on the product. And so it was just interesting. We had no marketing department. So we grew that business and became #1 in the market. And, I had to skin my elbows and skin my knees. But what I learned there in that role was so important. It was the inside out and outside in concept, right? So at that time in SAP, Hasso and friends, right, they left IBM because IBM didn't really buy into this concept of ERP. And so they ultimately were God, right? They wrote the script. Hasso had like 9 million lines of code in the payroll schema, for Christ's sakes, right? It was just crazy. But yet in America, it was all about the buyer. And so really tapping in and sitting across from a CHR, which I can't believe in my 20s I did, right? Like crap, because I had no idea what the heck I was talking about, except Harvard Business Review. So I was academic, not practical. And I'm, thank God, working with these incredible colleagues who came from, the ADPs of the world, right? Like they had been there and understood how to talk the language of HR, which was still pretty much core HR at that time, to be able to understand what their challenges were. And at the time, it was Y2K, quite frankly. So just getting that and learning it. Marketing, I came into by mistake. So I didn't enjoy my marketing classes in MBA school. It was all about advertising. And I would be like, well, that's stupid, right? So just because it was such a money game and it was so transactional, it was so kind of from the rooftops kind of thing. But I didn't have the vocabulary or mindset to understand why I had a problem. Today, you and I would talk about it's like old news kind of thing around, data. We're all into that. And then going to a company like SAP and many other B2Bs were at the time, this was pre-Marty Homlish, who joined from Sony. He brought Sony PlayStation to market. He was kind of a big deal, right? He came from B2C. He was the first CMO hired at SAP and created a global marketing organization. That marketing before then was a 4-letter word to me. And so I started getting attracted to it when Marty came on board and I stood up the first HCM marketing organization there and started to get some interesting insight. And so to your point, when I joined SAP, it was at a time where people were moving from manual to on-prem. So we had to convince them that this is more than just taking what you're doing and automating. We are now going to be able to do things more efficiently. Didn't quite get too effective yet, but more efficiently. And then a few years later, it was like, wow, we're going to be able to extract data from this. So then those processes were redesigned, right? So that we could get kind of machine data. And then there was the acquisition of SuccessFactors, which, I think you had in your notes for this podcast, really put this whole thing around SaaS on the map. And it did. And that was the point of that acquisition that, Bill and others worked on with Lars. And so really interesting. And what was so fascinating about SaaS, by that time I had been in marketing and marketing had started to go through this transformation that we still see HR on CHROs, and that is the transformation through data. What can you learn about the human being? What can you learn about their intrinsic and extrinsic motivators? What do you understand about if you do this, will they do that, right? What does that actually look like? How do you know how to talk to them, reach them? Everybody has noise. It's even worse now. And so that's really how those two things came together. What has kept me in tech, it goes back to that intersection and seeing that 100% of everything we do, whether it's what do I think? I have Google, thank you very much. What's going on in the world? I have Facebook for that, right? All of those things goes back to that tech, and it has changed the way that we interact with each other, the decisions we make, all of those things.
Yeah, and isn't it incredible? So, isn't it incredible just how much we take how much we take for granted now?
Absolutely.
I mean, when you think about, everything that we've done in our career has always been the process of leading people from one story to the next story. That's right. It's going from manual to automation, going from on-premise to cloud, going from, it's like from this, kind of organizing principle to the next organizing principle. And doesn't it seem, now it's like to talk about the, the first notions in what we now call work tech, that we could actually extract analytics because the data was centralized in a relational database format. I mean, it's just like no one even, we just take that for granted now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the other things, again, you took the job, right? That's
Yeah,
another
yeah.
point that you make in your book,
Exactly.
is just you just take the job. No one's qualified for any job. Men will often, jump into any job, regardless of whether they think they're qualified or not. But going back to that, how do you always end up in the right place at the right time? It's because you took the job.
It's because I took the job. I do want to say though, I did miss the boat, right? So I missed the boat, maybe not on the right job, but on the money that comes with it.
Yeah.
You and I both know, right, from our times, working with the big companies, that there are just folks who bought islands, right? I just was never that person. That's the
Yep.
boat I missed.
Well, yeah, and I, honestly, I'm sure it's easy to say this, but I don't think I would want to be that person. That's
Yeah.
a pretty hard life.
It's I think that, I think you're going to be okay. But yeah, it's absolutely true. But it does also just, timing is important, but taking the leap as well. And I do think that just in thinking from an HR lens, the amazing thing about HR people is we're very used to new generations entering the workforce.
Yeah.
It is different with digital natives, right? To your point, the expectation of data and what you can do with it. It informs every decision we make.
Yeah.
And also there's an analytical component to that and all that fun stuff. And so, when I think about what I have seen is absolutely still the conditioning of, if a woman doesn't know something, she takes the class, right? Like to your point in the book. And if a man doesn't know something, he takes the job. And so those kinds of things are, that's a place where marketing can help, by the way, right? Like you go and start the conditioning. It's also one of the other things about marketing that I think is so important that we'll probably get into is how you can leverage marketing to be a disruptor. So tech by itself is an innovative disruptor. It's always about doing something better, faster, and to impact more people. That's the point of a startup, right? That growth. And so when you can use marketing to say, and this is what we did in the ERP world when we went to on-prem and then we went to SaaS, where we got rid of concepts like self-service. Like that is so funny to think about now, isn't it? Like that was a thing. And when we think about well-being and I know we'll talk about this, but God, Brett, for years you couldn't talk about things like well-being with a straight face to a CHRO, let alone like a CEO. You just couldn't.
Yeah.
And now that's all we can talk about.
Yeah.
But when you can use your words in an empathetic and compassionate way, and compassion to me, I define it as when empathy meets action. When you can use them, when you can find the right channels to meet people where they are along a change curve, it's all about disrupting their thinking. It is about dismantling mindsets. And that's part of how we use marketing at Limeade that we'll talk about, dismantling mindsets around the Henry Ford challenge, right? Around, and I know it's overused and that's okay. Just like, go where the puck is going, Wayne Gretzky analogy is overused in marketing. But the whole concept around, if you asked your customers what they want, if you're Henry Ford, that he said, right, they want a faster horse, and really they want something from A to B. That's dismantling.
Well,
so it's exciting. Yeah.
Let's go back and there's a bunch of points kind of floating out here that I want to put together. We were talking a little bit about, moving from, manual to on-prem, moving from on-prem to software as a service or cloud, moving through another, major disruption right now where the entire world of work has changed. And the need to dismantle mindsets in order to use marketing as a tool for bringing people along with what's going on in the world. It's not just that we want to sell stuff.
Right.
That's part of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's also that this stuff needs to be sold because the world is changing and has changed several times. I mean, can you imagine someone still, processing applications manually? I've got some funny stories about that, but isn't it also strange, and maybe I'm making this up, but it seems like these moments of great change that offer the most significant opportunities for disruption also tend to go hand in hand with real economic downturns. Like there seems to be, I don't know if it's like a leading indicator or lagging indicator, but if you track every significant downturn, there's usually also within that area of years a significant shift from one paradigm to another in technology, whether that's from, going back to the, manual to on-prem or on-prem to cloud. All those acquisitions, SuccessFactors was purchased by SAP in 2001. That was the same time Oracle bought Taleo. That was the same time IBM bought Connexa. There was also kind of a pretty negative environment in 2001. So lots of acquisitions. There was a big, organizing principle around, moving to the cloud or software as a service. And it really got energized and sparked coming out of the downturn. It just seems that every time a downturn kind of meets at the same point of a big change in the world or a big change in technology, that the uptake of that disruptive solution really occurs. So, am I making that up, or that seems
no, it's right on. It's right on. And, and I think this is such a great jumping in point. So, and we've seen it, right? Renaissance, right? We know that just like when a big thing happens, like a pandemic, to your point, like a global kind of impact around the economy, which impacts every single human on the globe, we've seen that kind of art renaissance thing happen. And we're seeing that now, but we're also seeing the innovation piece. And, technology in our world is an art, right? Let's face it, because it impacts so many, it changes dialogues, right? It orchestrates new conversations. What it really drives home is what's important. I was talking with a former colleague from SAP, and just not for nothing, because I know it was not only SAP, but we're like, gosh, do you remember, like, we had a 30-minute meeting in Hong Kong and we all flew there for it, just wow, and then the two kind of points that I think about are 2001, what happened after September 11th and navigating those waters where tech spend was just cut off. And then 2008, right? When the financial markets, again, just spending stopped. And those are really big things. And it was that evaluation of whoa, right? The whoa happened. And what's really important are, if you're a B2B player, your B2B customers are spending less on whatever services or tech that they're providing. And we're facing that now. Limeade is no different, right, than any other tech company. We keep seeing all the job losses. What's been interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about those triggers, are we in an economic downturn? I think a lot of us were watching the news and going, but are we? Or are we deciding it's an economic downturn and therefore, right? Yeah. And I what I know are the signals I'm seeing. What I also believe is a lot of them are man-made, in that we're getting ahead of our skis on a few things, which makes sense, right? We're making sure and we're bracing for profitability. And so we're going back to those concepts. We're seeing a lot more companies. We saw, Benny Hoff and what he was talking about. We see what Google and Amazon are talking about. We see what we're talking about within Limeade. And that is absolutely, growth is critical, but we have to get to profitability. And a lot of companies like ours, we did have a positive impact from some of the downturn, because people were more focused on well-being. Certainly saw that in my previous life as well. But it's a big thing. And so how is that manifesting now? It's a few things. And what I'm seeing from where I sit inside of a C-suite of a public company that is B2B tech, what I'm seeing from our customers is that operational excellence is making a renaissance in a way, unlike any other. And there's, the OKR approach, right? There's all these different approaches that folks are making around operational excellence. The second part of that, though, is you can't have operational excellence if you are peanut butter spreading. So it's very much about, where are most profitable customers coming from, right? And then as a marketer, being able to say, and where does that fit from an ICP perspective? And then the final bit is really understanding what is going to separate you from the pack. So where are you going to make your big bet investments? And in our case, in Limeade, that of course comes in our R&D as well as in our product stack. That if our customers are focused in on the cost cutting or focused in on stuff and around, it really is cost cutting when it comes to benefits, right? Budget scrutiny, all that kind of stuff. How do we give them what they need in order to achieve them, at the same time dismantle their current thoughts around things like, we know CFOs are the main decision maker in pretty much every B2B tech play now. We know that, we get that. We see it from, competitors of your analysis. We see it from you. We're experiencing it in our own businesses because of cost cutting. And we sell at Limeade predominantly in North America to the benefits buyer. And I sold to benefits buyers for years as part of core HR. And that was, of course, the box, right, that all of this stuff put in for your benefits that you offer to folks, or your global benefit component. So for us, it's the actual platform. It's a well-being, immersive well-being platform where things around, health plans and financial health, and we describe well-being in four ways. The first is work well-being. We know, especially the pandemic has really underscored this thing for leaders, where we can't unsee our employees as human beings, right? And we know that work has a big implication on our well-being. The next is the traditional, the physical well-being. In our world, that manifests for a big focus in on high-risk populations, people with, diabetes, or those things that would cause kind of high absenteeism, high healthcare costs. There is financial well-being. We know from a market perspective, of course, there's someone like me who probably will never retire, but someone like me who's maybe thinking a little bit more around, oh, look, we have a visitor in a live podcast. Hi. That was my BBC moment. So we have the financial piece. We also know, Brett, that for millennials and Gen Zs, they're really freaked out about they're in more debt than in inability to pay for it, right, than any other generation. And then the final piece is emotional well-being. So, well-being could not be more important. We've seen the burnout factors, all of that. What makes this particular downturn different than the ones I just shared with you, although the other ones did have a global impact, especially, the terrorism one, right, 2001, it changed airports everywhere. It changed how we think about travel. It changed, companies didn't have that kind of crisis management plan before in place. But this one's different. This one came from a very long pandemic that, quite frankly, it's still on. We are still in a global pandemic. So it is very, very different. The other piece that changed, and as we think about money, as we think about what we're seeing, is it's also shifting of power. For sure, activist shareholders are not new. We've seen them quite a bit over the last decade. But Benioff is we mentioned him. That's what happened, right? He came on, he did this, rather long, it sounds like, all hands with his team, but they had to make those tough cost-cutting decisions because of an activist shareholder that bought in and said, you overspent, you saw growth where, quite frankly, wasn't, you are being irresponsible with your investment dollars, is ultimately what they said. So that has been, kind of something that's a little different. The other thing that's different, and I know we're kind of seeing it go back and forth, and that is the power shift within companies themselves. And so we have these millennials who now represent the largest portion of the workforce. We have the Gen Zs coming. They are digital natives. They also have expectations. Unlike my generation, right, our generation, or baby boomers who were not raised or conditioned to believe that our employer was really responsible for anything for us at all. They weren't responsible for my social political views and me being able to say it. They weren't responsible for my own mental health. Those were choices I was forced to make as a woman and as a human being. And this just feels different because it's now not only an expectation of work, but we are highly dependent on the health and all four of those factors in order to achieve those goals, right? So it's a big deal. That is different. And so now when I'm looking at our market, I think, the conversation you and I had recently was, the tech sector, especially the West Coast here in the United States, is like, I'm over wellness. You might be over wellness, but you're not over well-being. And here's what that looks like. And so again, Limeade's no different. We have certainly tightened around who are the customers, who are most of a fit, and they tend to be progressive for sure, but there's also quite traditional who are looking for, how do I cut costs while increasing the well-being of my people? We have been focusing in on what are those innovations that will set us apart? What do we do better than anyone else? But here's the thing, we have to use marketing to dismantle mindsets. So our top competitor has really kind of set the tone, right, around what does well-being in the workplace look like. And of course, being their competitor, I'm going to be like, yeah, but you don't achieve very much. So it's about dismantling not the mindset around the metrics of what you should measure, because the CFO and the CIO are going to have a say. Our market has suffered from appization, right? The unbelievable amount of investment has come into apps. So we are dealing with a buyer that has just so many different applications that they're spending their money on. Nobody is visiting them. What does that look like? And instead of saying you're measuring the wrong thing and looking at the wrong thing, it's the way that you are getting there needs to change. And so really, really interesting to see how that's starting to shift, because when I look at the past, the 2001s, the 2008s, we were actually challenging what people were measuring themselves against.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the how, but the measurement. So that also feels different.
Well, you're doing it right now. I mean, you're doing exactly what you're talking about. You're dismantling mindsets just through the course of that conversation, right? But what's really interesting is to go back to something you said earlier, coming out of the great financial crisis. What happened after that? It was only the longest uninterrupted period of expansion in work tech in history. I mean, we had like $65 billion invested in work tech in the last 2 years, prior to this, kind of whatever this situation is that we're in right now. And that was more than like the last, 25 years combined, right? And so here we are in another creative opportunity where mindsets need to be dismantled, but something inherent in what you're saying is that there's a real opportunity here because everyone's thinking about everything differently because of the pandemic, but then also through the lens of operational excellence and, how measuring success is changing. And so the seam that you have to be able to hit is, okay, I've got a great story. The time for the story is now. I need to dismantle these mindsets. And what often happens, I love underdog stories, right? And one of the things I love about it, I mean, TCU just played the national championship against Georgia. I'm in Fort Worth. TCU got dismantled, which is okay. They beat Michigan on the way. It's okay. But, the thing is, we're all underdogs.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at any market, there's usually like one big leader and, maybe 3 or 4, challengers, and then a bunch of underdogs. We're all underdogs. In times like these, the leaders usually pull back. And they're the ones with the largest, kind of checkbooks in terms of, taking up all the media spots and, filling the share of voice. And you have this opportunity as people's needs are changing, and as you have the story that will dismantle people's, patterns of thinking, to actually get more than your fair share, if you're aggressive and efficient and effective in how you market. And almost, again, another story that people are tired of hearing me tell. In the year 2000, remember Conan O'Brien, in the year 2000, there was no Salesforce.com.
Yep.
Now they have the largest skyscraper and are the largest employer in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. That's how fast leadership can change. That's not a lot of time when you think about the scope of that company and how quickly they overtook companies who were fighting against the organizing principle. And so we are in one of those moments now, and you've brought in so many of the points that are important to taking advantage of a moment like this, which is making sure that you have the story for the moment, and that you're purpose driven in that story, and that you are focused on getting that story out to the people in a repetitive way. And that's another thing that was kind of, part of what you were saying is that all the stuff changes through conversation. It's not a, connect, convert motion. You don't like find somebody with purchase intent and then sell them on a new way of thinking about, wellness and well-being. You have to be engaged with them over a long period of time so that you have that ability to change the way that they measure success and to change the way that they think about things. And if you turn all that stuff off because everyone else is turning it off, you're only missing the single biggest opportunity you're going to have in a decade.
It's so true. And just in listening to you, you're bringing up such a big point. So one of the things that we as marketers have not seen before is there's so much tech out there, right? And I think that the last 10 years have been incredible in MarTech, just absolutely incredible. And we're so much more working toward that ecosystem versus MarTech, where I get it. Gosh, the last 2 years, I'm like, right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, the AI component, all that stuff, but just really what I can look at and what I can know. But then there's the buyer. And so what we're seeing is not indifferent to other economic downturns, where they will turn to their vendor and say, not only do I need to learn what tech can do to help me, I need you to actually help me understand what business processes, what should my team look like?
Yeah.
What do I get rid of? What do I replace? And so there's that consultative view. What's been so interesting now that we are so highly digitalized in that funnel, and a whole other conversation around the funnel and the pipeline, and that is so antiquated. And we've seen the HubSpots of the world start to tie. I don't remember what they called it, but moments of truth is essentially what it is. And so what we're seeing as B2B marketers, and I can't talk to B2C, but B2B marketers, is that thing around self-education, and how people are really not following a linear path. And so if you are only looking at a linear path and you're looking at the traditional, kind of serious decisions kind of approach to use a blog here, use a video there, you're looking at it the wrong way. And instead, and therefore you're not going to deliver the information to the people when they need it. And you're not going to be able to break through the noise around, we hear you, we know what you are talking about, here's what we have to uniquely help you with the business stuff, with the tech stuff. And so what we're seeing is just so fascinating, Brett, around how, someone might sign up for a demo, which is a pretty, earlier in the marketing stage. And then, they show up or not. And then, right, those leading indicators become lagging indicators, and lagging indicators, like do people show up for a demo, become leading indicators, which is a really important thing for the audience to understand. Things around ARR, pipeline metrics, like the numbers things, those are actually lagging indicators in an economic downturn. That's super important. And I wish we talked about that more. But what we're seeing from those insights around how people are consuming, why they're consuming, how they may ask for a demo in their kind of first 3 months of whatever it is that they're teaching themselves about. But my God, it might happen right before being converted over to a sales lead. Like it's crazy. So we're seeing that. What we're also learning, though, is using data is like, what are they talking about? How are the patterns of decision making? You can almost guess who they're talking to internally, by the way, like when you see those things. And then to your point, what are the words we have to use? What are the channels and mechanisms through which to orchestrate those conversations? What are the combos? And there's a lot of traditional A/B testing, stuff like that, where we can say, hey, we know you're concerned about a few things. And in our market, it's CFOs going to their CHROs, and therefore the benefits people that fit under total rewards or wherever these folks are sitting in an org, and they're looking at overall budgets, right? And they're going back to the whoa that we talked about. What is essential for us? What do we need to do as an employer? The compliance mindset. And then you have the HR. What do we need to do as an employer? The people mindset. The next is around incentives, and those aren't going away for a long time, but there is starting to be, because of data, people are getting a lot smarter at the business leadership level around understanding. It's one thing to incent someone to sign on to a solution. That's not where you stop, though. And that's ultimately what incentive design is, right? That's what incentives do. So really, understanding those two things are important. In our world, in Limeade is an organization that was absolutely founded on what many people would think is a nice to have. And that's well-being. That is taking care of those 4 things that we talked about. And what we're realizing, again, from the pandemic that I hope doesn't go away, is that they're non-negotiables. Well-being is not a ball that you're juggling. It's literally the hands that keep the balls juggling in the air. But yet we're being asked to solve the money piece. Another thing I'm interested to hear, your thoughts on, and would be so interesting from other marketers. We do so much in since I've been in the B2B, work tech space, it was always about programmatic or program ROI, right? Like, what am I getting? What's the payback?
Yep.
What my market data is showing me now is, and when market data, as well as like using Gong, right, to analyze the call. What we're seeing is it's less about ROI and more about are people less absent? Are my costs going down, right? For the dismantling piece, and how I use marketing is to say, again, those things aren't changing the metrics, but how you've been trying to achieve those things has to change because it hasn't worked. That's where that value comes in. And not to make this a Limeade commercial, but some of the things that we're investing in this year that will help people be able to achieve those numbers, help benefits buyers be able to not only justify their in expense, but turn it into an investment, is around things like, how do we infuse well-being into work so that my people are not only healthier, but on the more kind of transformational side, that I'm not making them choose between well-being, their personal well-being, and their work. So we have a big investment in with Microsoft Teams and with Viva to have Limeade be part of that experience. It's, I don't know, 500,000 or sorry, 500 million people or something, I can't remember, use it. So we hit that, and that doesn't stop. The next thing is around partnerships like what we have with Work Partners. Work Partners has been in the industry for 25 years. They're a UPMC company, and they have multiple solutions that are more on the wellness side, right? Clinical, EAPs, that kind of thing. And so this is really closing a gap for those folks who have multiple applications that they're trying to serve that for. You have the clinical piece, you understand how much this person's costing you, where they fit in that high risk population or outside. You can get a lot more proactive, and you combine that with giving people agency around their own well-being. So they're not just signing on once a year during open enrollment, they're actually using the investments that you made from them. And then, that final piece really is around helping people to target their communications. And this is a place where HR really is starting to look a little bit more like marketing, where you can target to people based on multiple data points. Location, whatever kind of challenges they have from those 4 factors, how they're using the solution, how it's working for them. And that's really exciting, but it's a dismantling, Brett, because people are looking at those traditional means. So I love seeing that intersection between the way that HR and work tech is being used and what we as marketers have learned over the last 10 or so years.
Yeah, it's all the same stuff. I mean, it's all the same stuff. And so you were talking about, ROI versus, absenteeism or engagement, I would say.
Yeah, right.
It's like, so we should make a list. We should write it down and put it in an envelope and leave it in a desk to be found in the next downturn, because we figured this stuff out. Like, look, when your RFPs start to come in and they're no longer just like lists of features and functions, and they're asking open-ended questions that seem to imply, hey, show us what you got, tell us what we ought to be thinking about. You are in a moment of disruption. When your sales cycles slow down, when people seem to be taking more time to make decisions, when you're losing more deals to no decision rather than fast sales cycles to competitors, you are in the moment of disruption. When the metrics no longer tell the story of what's actually happening, you are in the moment of disruption. And that's like, it takes a while. You have to be through it a couple of times, because, you made a great point about metrics being lagging indicators or leading indicators, depending on what the hell's going on. And you have to have been through it a few times to realize that lake turns over. And when the numbers start to tell you something that doesn't track with what your experience over the last few years has been, that's an opportunity to ask questions and identify these bigger trends. And so I got so wrapped up in our conversation that I missed all of these questions that were coming in. And one of them, we've been talking about Downturn, but there is a quick shout out. Hello to my old manager, Patty, always bringing the energy. I don't like to say people's names on air. This person's initials are KB. And
oh my gosh, hey, I know you don't, but you might remember him as well. Yes. Hello, my friend.
Hello. And we've got another person whose initials are MP asking, are we facing a real economic downturn, or is the marketplace buying into a narrative that may not be true?
Ding, ding, ding.
I have to turn this. I got one of these robots, one of these Astro robots, and it just wakes up every night. I have to turn it off. Hold on. I don't know how to use it yet. And it just keeps like, it's kind of like it wakes up every now and then, needs to be fed or something. I don't know.
I really enjoyed that last question. Yeah, for sure.
So are we buying into a narrative? And I would also ask, Patti, does it matter?
Exactly the point. Exactly the point, right? We as marketers know perception is reality. And I have to say, I know the MP, because I'll follow Brett's rule here about names. I have to tell you, I do believe so much of it is man-made. I really do. And now it's becoming reality, right? We're seeing it. And all this stuff you mentioned, Brett, is right on. And I also loved how you framed it, which is we're in the middle of a disruption. Here's what the signals are. Fight it or accept it so you can address it and assess the situation, address it, and really learn what's going to work, because all that's off right now.
Yeah. Well, if perception is reality,
yes,
then change the perception.
That's right. Exactly.
And I think I'll start because I believe that what I'm about to say has the additional benefit of being true. Work tech is always a little bit before other tech categories in terms of being impacted by a downturn. We get hit sooner and we recover sooner. And I just finished a workup of about 40 different companies in work tech, and it was a down second half for the first time since like 2012 or something like that. And it was just flat, basically. It was a little bit north of flat. And what we're seeing now is that in December and in the beginning of January, it's already starting to pick up again. And if you go back in the Wayback Machine, I can't believe we're already running out of time. If you go back in the Wayback Machine, by the time you're driving down the street, listening to the radio, listening, what's the sports radio up in Boston?
Oh, NECN. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We're listening to Nesson. And you're driving down, the street, and you hear Goldman Sachs laying off people, and you hear all the big companies laying off people. It's already happened. Yeah. It's already over for work tech. So, my belief is that we were in it before we knew it, and now we're talking about it as we're exiting it. And so, and I think we're going to climb back pretty quickly.
That's a great point, though, Brett, that I really hope people take in. And even those of us who have been in the industry for a really long time, we are the leading indicator as work tech, right? But what does that say about us as business leaders is really the next question we should be asking ourselves. Yeah. Where we divest first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I run an agency that is marketing for work tech companies.
That's right.
So I get double whammy because it's like, oh, the first thing to go is marketing. Yeah. Oh, the first thing to go is like our people solutions. Like, well, fuck.
You better move back to Massachusetts and figure something else out, but you seem to be doing just great, by the way.
Oh, we're doing great. We're doing great. All right. Last question, because I did it again. I took all of our time. What's your overall outlook for 2023?
Yeah, so I should probably sit here and cry in my soup, but I'm not. My overall outlook for 2023 is we are going to continue to have in the B2B space, and you started hinting at it, deals that were meant to close this year or early, at least in the first half, either going to the second half or going to 2024 because of what, are we facing the real economic downturn, or is it a perception? Trust me, CFOs don't care. That is what they're looking at, right? So that's really important. And what does that mean? That means a few things as a marketer. If you have a solid customer base, you double down on that customer base. So that's one of my outlooks is we're going to see an even greater focus, not just from marketing, not just from customer success teams, but from entire organizations on how do we keep our customers engaged. And in our world, the SaaS world, it's about renewals, but it's so much more than that. How do we keep them engaged? Of course, there's upsell and all those things that are your lowest hanging fruit, but how do we invest in things like truly creating a community? And I don't mean just an online thing, but how do we enable customers to have what they need? Because they're also going through a transformation. So that's super important, in being able to focus in on truly meeting those folks where they are on the change curve and then sitting next to them. It is more of a consultative and challenge play, but I think quite important. The other piece is in my world is around well-being, and it is finally getting to a point where we now understand that you cannot have successful cost kind of clinical metrics without the cultural piece. And so I'm seeing a lot of things in our Gong recordings around what the questions that people are asking, seeing it from the data around, we will grow in this area. We're seeing it from our competitors using some of the same language around culture. But again, it doesn't mean they're going to buy this year, right? It means they're prepping for next year. And I think just the final piece is nothing is off the table. And that's kind of what I see for 2023. I've kind of given up on crystal ball predictions, you know, just because but that is absolutely what I see, is more of a muscle around understanding how to lead during times of uncertainty, knowing full well we always were this. It's just never been this big before. And then just I guess just the final thing is I am interested to see the AI piece. You know, a lot of us say AI when we mean machine learning, so okay, fine, but what jobs are going to be replaced inside of marketing, as well as within organizations overall. And again, don't see a lot of necessary spend there from HR overall, but certainly to your point, one of those, what could be different, what could be better, what could be more efficient.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
economic downturn indicators I don't see going away this year.
Yeah, so just a couple of great points that you brought up. My research shows a very similar kind of outlook. I actually pointed to a very specific pattern that has been repeated several times, where in the second half of 2023, you're going to see the normal buyers get layered over by the pent-up demand, and you're going to have a short period of rapid growth, probably in the second half, maybe in the first half of 2023. And, word of caution and also word of opportunity. If you have deals that are stalled, or your perception is that they're lost, no decision, do not stop talking to them.
Yes,
because
exactly.
you're going to need to close those deals, and the deals that were coming in when they were supposed to come in order to take advantage of that real burst of growth that's going to happen in the second half of this year. And then the last thing that I'll say is this AI, I'll tell you, we're running tests internally where we've got a team of people who are literally completing 85% of like 30, 40-hour projects in 15 or 20 minutes. And then, taking, 5 hours to finish out the rest of the component. But there is a skill and a craft necessary to utilizing these tools the right way. But we're using it for content, we're using it for creative, we're using it for all kinds of things. And it's astounding. And it's just something that has to be experienced to believe. But the implications, if you're a professional services organization, forget about marketing for a second. If you're a professional services organization and you're delivering change management reports and 30% of your revenue stream is professional services, and you can knock out 85%, it's going to make professional services work look as good as software as a service work from a margin perspective.
I wonder, sorry to interrupt you, but I wonder if you're seeing the same thing I am. And it's really funny, right? So I tested a while ago around content.
Yep.
And what was so funny is the bot was writing in a more human way than I do. It usually takes me a few revisions to move away from corporate speak. And it's fascinating, and seeing it, to your point, in other applications outside of marketing, it is a bit more human. Are you seeing that?
Well, so I haven't actually done it myself.
Okay.
But we've got a team that is experimenting with it. And the reason I know that it's incredible is that they snuck in about 3 of our newsletters. So we have one of the most broadly read newsletters in work tech.
Great newsletter.
Thank you. And we've got one for work leaders, and we've got one for work tech insiders, and all that stuff. And I found out that like 3 of our newsletters were written primarily by AI, and those were some of my favorite ones.
Yes. So there we go. Yeah.
And I just read a children's story yesterday that was written by one of our content writers. That was 15 minutes of programming, a couple hours afterwards, and it was. I don't want to give the title away because it'll give the whole story away, and it's a pretty good book. But it's very human. You cannot, if you have a talented writer who is also talented at giving instructions to the ghost in the machine
Yes.
to go out, then you end up, surprise, surprise, with a very, human outcome. But it all comes down to, input, input equals output.
That's right.
Well, Dr. Patti Fletcher, we went over time and everyone stuck with us. Thank y'all all so much. What an honor it has been. What a great conversation. Could have gone on for hours. Wish we could. But this will sound much cooler in the outro in post when we add in music and everything. Don't forget to get Dr. Patti Fletcher's book, Disruptors. It's really, really good. I hope it was clear that I'm a big fan. And it is more relevant. And I wanted to just ask you all these questions about, this book was released just prior to the pandemic, and, what changed in terms of either progress or giving back progress. Maybe, we need to jump back on again and have a whole conversation about this topic, because there's just too much to cover today. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun. I took notes. Thank you very much for that. I'll be sharing with my team, but thank you for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Until we speak again, enjoy dinner tonight.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye, Brett.
Bye.